This lesson is on 1-7, the distributive property. Today's learning target is to use the distributive property to simplify expressions. Now let's take a look at today's math terms. The first term is distributive property. The distributive property is to multiply each term inside the parentheses by the number or variable that is outside of the parentheses. A term is a number, variable, or the product or quotient of a number and one or more variables. Constant is a term that has no variable. The coefficient is the numerical factor when a term has a variable. Like terms with exactly the same variable factors in a variable expression. When talking about the distributive property, I often use the example of the teacher handing out candy to the students. When a teacher hands out candy to the students, every student wants to receive a piece of candy. It would be unfair if one student was left out. So keep that in mind when you're thinking about the distributive property. We want to distribute this A to the B and the C. We don't want to leave anything out inside the grouping symbols. So that leads to A times B plus A times C. The same thing, if the A is on the right-hand side, we still want to distribute it to the B and the C. And we have B times A plus C times A. When we have subtraction, it's still exactly the same thing. We just have subtraction instead of addition. So we want to share that A with everything inside the parentheses. So we have A times B minus A times C. And again, when it's on the right-hand side, we still have B times A minus C times A. Now we will try some examples. In example A, we're going to distribute the 3 to the x and the 8. So we have 3 times x. It's addition, so we do plus 3 times 8. Now we just simplify, and we have 3x plus 24. Example B, we're going to distribute the -7, and it's also a subtraction problem. So we have 5b times -7 minus 4 times -7. We simplify, and we have 5b. And since 4 times -7 is -28, we have minus -28, which actually equals plus 28. Now we will look at rewriting fractions. If I have 7x plus 2 over 5, that is the same thing as having 1/5 times 7x plus 2. I can then use the distributive property and have 1/5 times 7x plus 1/5 times 2. So I end up with 7x over 5 plus 2 over 5. So we just took the original fraction and rewrote it. And I want you to take notice that all we really did was separate the top two numbers, and the denominator is still 5 for both of them. Now in this next example, we're going to do 1/7 times 6x minus 9. So we have 1/7 times 6x minus 1/7 times 9. So when we multiply that, we have 6x over 7 minus 9 over 7. Again, you should notice that we just separated the top two terms, 6x and minus 9, and gave them both a denominator of 7. Next, we'll look at the multiplication property of -1. When we look at this, we have this subtraction sign in front of the parentheses. When we have a problem like this, there is always this invisible 1 right after that subtraction or negative sign. So it becomes a -1 that we are going to distribute. So we're going to have -1 times 2y minus -1, I'm only putting it in parentheses to separate the subtraction and the negative, times 3x. Then we simplify. -1 times 2y is -2y. -1 times 3x is -3x. But since it's minus -3x, we're going to make it -2y plus 3x. Example B, I'm going to do the same thing without writing in the -1, but it is still a -1 that is invisible. So we're just distributing this negative. Another way to look at it is we're changing the signs of everything inside the parentheses to the opposite sign. So we have -1 times 4x plus -1 times 6y. -1 times 4x is -4x. -1 times 6y will have plus -6y, which is actually -4x minus 6y, because our subtraction really does just represent a negative. I'm going to use the expression you see here to describe some of your vocabulary words. First of all, we have 6a, -5ab. The subtraction sign stays with the term that follows it, 3b, and -12. So these are our terms. And as I said, the subtraction sign stays with it as a negative. So we have 6a is a term, -5ab is a term, 3b is a term, and -12 is a term. If you miss those negatives, then you don't have the correct terms listed. Now, -12 is also what we call a constant. It has no variables, so our constant in this one is just -12. 6, -5, and 3 are all our coefficients. So that is 6, -5, and 3. Again, you have to have that negative, and you'll see why in a couple minutes. Those are our coefficients. Now we're going to look at some examples of what we call like terms, and like terms have exactly the same variable factor. 2x and 3x are like terms. 4x squared and 2x squared are like terms. 3xy and 9yx are like terms. Examples that are not like terms: 2x and 3x squared. Because the x is squared, they do not have exactly the same variable factors. 4xy squared, 6x squared y. They are not like terms because they do not have exactly the same variable factors. It would be okay to change the order of the x and y, but the fact that y is squared in the first term and x is squared in the second term, they are no longer like terms. 8x and 8xy, even though they both have an x, the second one has a y, which makes them not the same like terms. So now when we look at combining like terms, if you look at A here, like terms are going to have the same exact variable factors, and this does. They both have x squared. So when we combine like terms, we're going to add their coefficients. Now remember from above, the coefficients are the numerical factor in a term. So we're going to add 8 plus 2 and get 10x squared. Now for B, we have more things involved here. So we're going to start with the first one, which is a 5x, and its like term is a negative 3x or a minus 3x. Either way, it stays with the 3x. So I'm just going to put 5x minus 3x next to each other because I'm going to put all my like terms together. Next we have minus 3 and plus 4. Those are two constants. So minus 3 and plus 4. Again, the sign is staying with it. And lastly, we have plus 6y. So now I can look at this and I can add all the like terms. 5x minus 3x is 2x. Minus 3 plus 4, that's like a negative 3 and a positive 4. So that gives me a positive 1. And 6y does not have any like terms, so that just gets written as 6y. Now it is your turn. When you hand in your homework tomorrow, you will have the notes completely filled out, and you will answer these 4 problems for your turn. Have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow.